Learn the most empowering hiring techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with your host, Rick Girard.
Do you have performance metrics for every person before they are hired? Are they clear on their expectations for successful employment? Now, if not, you're setting people up for failure because our expectations are never in alignment. We're going to leave it to you to just kind of figure it out. And then we scratch our heads when the person fails, wondering what we missed during the interview. Now, what was missed was long before the interview. It was the work on defining the role and writing down the company's expectations of what needed to be accomplished by the individual in the first 90 to 120 days of employment. I've discovered that companies who just wing it have a much higher turn down rate and employee failure rate than companies that invest the time to clearly define what success looks like. Look, it's not too hard because you don't know what will happen in the next few months of the business. If it is too hard, maybe you're in the wrong business. I'm Rick Girard. Welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We help entrepreneurs and executives win the strongest hires by sharing insights from top performing rebel entrepreneurs, game changers, and industry leaders, like our guest today, Mr. Kurt Davis. Now, Kurt is the CEO of Byteline, a technology entrepreneur and author. The first 20 years of his career were spent in the Silicon Valley and Asia, working with technology startups in finance and business development roles. Kurt is now focused on Byteline, which is a startup marketplace for dental professionals. And he recently published a book called Navigate to the Lighthouse, a Silicon Valley guide to executing global deals, which is what makes Kurt the perfect expert for today's topic. Kurt, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Hi, thanks for having me and excited to be here to chat.
Pleasure to have you. We're going to talk about expectations alignment. We're going to talk about poorly defined metrics of success and how we get past that and set people up for success when they join your company. Sound like a plan?
Yes, sounds like a good plan.
So, Kurt, you've been through this quite a few times. We talked at length prior to the show that one of your angles was that because we don't take the time to define metrics of success, we experience failure. What's been kind of the challenge that you experience or that you see out there?
Yeah, I think what I'm learning in my role now, but also what I've learned in previous roles, is that the team, the startup team, has to really be sure what they are measuring and what they want to achieve. Um, and especially in this downturn and the recession that's approaching, that we have to be very uh, specific with what those are. And I talk about this in this kind of first came up in my book that I wrote, Navigate to the Lighthouse, where I talk about how to hire a business development person. And so often companies hire biz dev people without the idea of what they should be doing because that's an expensive hire who needs to come in and close relatively large deals.
Well, actually, every hire is usually a rather expensive hire, right?
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about why this is important to a company.
Well, you don't want to, I think we don't want to misstep and hire the wrong person and start over. We don't want to have the person fail in their role. So, hiring slow here is a good idea. But the reason is it gets you to the planning stage of the people and exactly what they're going to execute against when they come in. So, whether that's a biz dev person, a UX designer, or a customer success or service person, you should know exactly what their role is and what metrics they're executing and what ROI that leads to. So that way they come in and they're not only excited, but they're set up to succeed. They know what they have to do to succeed in that first 12 months. They're not thinking going left, going right. They're just coming in and get in their seat and go to work. And that's quite important at a startup. Very, very important at a startup.
And I experience a lot of founders who say to me, hey, look, at the role's kind of out of my scope and I don't know, it's outside my expertise level and what I'm comfortable with. And I think we'll just hire the right person and let them come in and tell us what needs to be done. I find that so dangerous.
That could often at times, I think, work in a very well-funded environment where you hire an exceptionally experienced person who's done that job 2 or 3 or 4 times, and then they can come in and define that. But I think for others who are hiring younger people who are in their first time, second time in a role, um, you'd like to know that the strategy that you're executing against, the tactics are in place for them to come in and learn the business, uh, but do their job while learning the business. And then figure if they have those ideas and thoughts of figuring new things out, we'll let them run with that in month 6, 7, 8, you know, once they're settled in. But I just think, yeah, especially when you're hiring, kind of, you know, people who are, 10, 15 years your junior, I think it's really important to make sure those roles are defined. Because when you're going to look back at saying, why didn't I achieve, especially now, again, I hit this recession, that the only way you're going to get funded, the only way you're going to get people to look at you if you're not in something sexy like NFT or something like that, or funny money crypto, uh, is to is to actually show growth. And so everything we're doing at our startup, every person has to execute against a growth metric. Everybody, the engineers, the product people, the UX people, the customer success people, everybody. And those metrics are defined, they're researched, and we analyze them, and then we say, here's the metrics you got to hit.
And you're setting somebody up for success. It's like when you go to a college class, you have a syllabus of what the semester is going to entail. I don't find that is often the case in most hires that are made. It's like we need somebody to come in, fill this role, and hopefully it works. When it doesn't, we're left thinking, oh gosh, what did we miss in the interview process? But it was really like we did not set the expectations up front to whether or not somebody was going to be successful. You're stacking the deck against yourself in a way.
Yeah, and then then what happened, and I like your metaphor or this analogy of syllabus, because really that's what it is. I mean, if you then hire people and they're kind of trying to draw it out, and then 6 months later you're like, well, why hasn't this product succeeded, or why hasn't it sold? Well, it's the hiring person to blame, not necessarily the person who they hired.
Yeah, it's usually the recruiter.
Yeah.
It's the recruiter's fault.
And I actually think you're seeing a lot of this now in big tech, right? I mean, they hired a lot of people, and I laugh and chuckle because some of those companies, Stripe, they used to pound their chests, we're the hardest company in the world to get into, like, like we're so great. But maybe you don't know how to hire, and maybe you don't even know how to execute and run your business, because they'll just hire people to fill roles, right? And then you look back and say, well, what have these people been doing? Why haven't, of course you haven't grown, because these people haven't had to deliver that successfully delivers and executes against metrics. And I actually think that's a big problem. I mean, I see it in Silicon Valley. I see these people and I'm like, what do these people do? Like, they get paid a lot of money. I'm like, what? I don't even know what half of them do. I'm like,
That is very true. I see it all the time too. I still do about half my work in the Valley.
I love one of my favorite quotes. I was hanging out with some people, and they were kind of this hodgepodge of a group, and kind of a motley crew. And one of the ladies, it was a doctor. She's like, you should just go work at Facebook. I mean, this is my buddy. He just like, he just hangs out there, works like 35-hour weeks, and just like goes on vacation whenever he wants. And I'm just like, and gets paid like $300,000. And I'm like, yeah, I've never had a job like that. Like, I have to, when I worked in a startup, like I was busting my butt 70, 80 hours a week, right? Like, but it's kind of a difference of how you play the game, which is a different story. How you play that game is over now, and it will be over for a while.
I would get bored out of my mind with that job. I couldn't even imagine. It reminds me of the sitcom that was on HBO, Silicon Valley, where they had a bunch of guys, they paid them a whole bunch of money, but they didn't have work for them to do. So they were barbecuing and playing Xbox on the roof of the building.
What they had a name for that, didn't they? They had it was called the
Unassigned
unassigned.
or something like that.
Yeah.
What's interesting, especially if you're a smaller company, is these hiring failures really kind of equate back to lack of preparation. That's really doesn't take that much to do, and just to sit down and think about it and plan.
Yeah, and I think it's planning is important, and I think you have to be really rigorous, and you have to really figure it out at this juncture in time. You have to be very rigorous on what that plan is to a detailed level, right? And um, some of that on the biz dev and sales side, you can see it in the book in the first few chapters that I wrote in Navigate to the Lighthouse. You can see how I devised that plan and how what the person is supposed to do against the plan.
You're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. I'm your host, Rick Girard. And for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment from our sponsors.
Hello, this is Michael Vandervoort from the Drive Through HR podcast, where we discuss ideas, trends, and activities that impact HR, talent, HR technology, and the workplace. Our focus is on expanding knowledge and igniting curiosity as we hear directly from people who are shaping the future of the HR industry. Join us.
Hey, check out stridesearch.com. There you'll find additional content and resources and your link to healing career wounds. Let it be your company's secret weapon to landing the strongest people. Our guest today is Kurt Davis, and we're talking about execution of defining your success metrics. Let's talk about how we define the problem. So we can get in probably some of the content of your book, because let's lay out for the audience what they can do to plug into their business so they can actually put together performance metrics or metrics of success for each person before they actually go into the interview process and hire someone.
Yeah, sure. So I think you've talked about having, a hiring kind of grid or rubric where you kind of measure people based on values and things like that. But I think if you look further upstream, before you get there, you need to have a kind of a framework of what you need that person to do. Right. And then, in this book, I call this the Lighthouse framework. Okay. And this framework kind of defines um, which companies in a sales role or business development role that you're going to approach, the expected return, the expected probability, the expected value, and the expected return, all calculated in this spreadsheet. And then what we do then is say, well, in the case of closing these deals, we would need a person with the following characteristics: experiences, knowledge, background, XYZ. Have they worked on these large deals? Do they have industry expertise? Do they have the ability to think strategically? Do they have a good idea on how to work with product? And so, do they check all the boxes in order to then fit into the ability to execute into that framework that we call the Lighthouse framework? And so that's kind of an example, and we'll use numbers, looks at expected probabilities, and then we'll quantify it so that we know that that person comes in order to close a Lighthouse 2 or 3 big business development deals a year. They'll need to, source 40 or 50 deals. They'll need to maintain contact point for those. They'll need to work in the industry. They'll have to go to conferences. They'll have to know the venture capitalists, and so forth and so on. And so then that role becomes extremely clear of numerically what they need to do, and how their time should generally be spent. And that's how we do it.
Okay, so that's mapping out their KPIs or what is expected of them. But what about like the first 30, 60, 90 days? How do you view like how we prep them to be successful in that first probationary period?
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, I think all companies differ, right? Like, and the position obviously differs.
Well, let's just take a business development person, right? I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. If I'm a founder and my background's kind of more salesy, so if I'm bringing on a biz dev person, I'm probably thinking of it from the perspective of you're going to go out and you're just going to sell. It's different. So my domain knowledge is probably less so than the person who is the business development person.
Exactly. So I think there's in a role like business development, there's a lot of, that first kind of 2 weeks to probably a month. There's a lot of learning and education that goes on with understanding how the product works, understanding your company's capabilities, your engineering, because in business development, you're working a lot with different teams, right? So there's a lot of getting to know the team, how they work, and how it's structured, so that then you can then start to do outbound and then talk uh, knowledgeably about the company and the business and the product and what it can and can't do, and how flexible it can be and adaptable it can be. So I think there's a 2 week, 2 or 3 week period. So when you're I don't espouse to the whole idea of hit the ground running. I'm more like hit the ground walking. Let's walk. Let's make sure you're in a good position, uh, and then let's start to turn the gears up so that you can execute against those KPIs that we need you to execute against. Um, and I think by 90 days, you should be more or less 100% on that rhythm.
Should you? It depends on, like, you may have to come in and learn a whole lot about the business, the product, that sort of thing. I think this is why I think of it in terms of like being realistic about, okay, what's a 30-day measurable, right? Well, actually, let's break it down to the first week. First week, what do we want you to accomplish? Well, we want you to dive into the product and learn everything you can about the product. And then first 30, what is it exactly that I'm going to look at you and go, okay, you're 30 days in and you have a really good grasp of X, Y, and Z. And then kind of building deliverables to those milestones so that you can understand whether or not somebody is coming along the way that you need them to come along. I don't think that you're going to have anybody closing a deal, especially a big one, in 90 days, right? Usually those cycles can be up to a year, 2 years sometimes.
Yeah, I think along with that, it's there's a learning phase, call it 2 or 3 weeks. So there's what I would say a strategy phase for some of these people where they're building, thinking through the product, they're thinking through this analysis, this lighthouse framework, or hey, how are we going to approach this? Even though you've done that work, you say, here's what we think you should do. This is what this role should roughly do, but we want you to take that and put together your plan, your strategy, put your color on that, because you want that person also to own the job, to know that they,
Absolutely.
but you know what you want to achieve from a high level, and this is roughly what to do. So then they sprinkle their pixie dust on it, and so by the way you're 4 or 5 weeks into it, you should start some cycles of outbound reach out, contacting, trying to trying to warm it up a little bit and get started, to then, again, in the biz dev role, you're probably going to take 90 days to then have the full strategy of how we're going to go about executing these companies and deals, and what is the plan for marketing and sales and engineering product to work on these things. So you're right in that sense. In a biz dev sense, it does take 90 days. Now, in other senses, like where I am now in my startup.
So if you have deliverables for each milestone, this is really simple way to kind of structure this so that you can put your performance metrics in place. At 30 days, you're going to present to the team your findings on X. At 60 days, you might prepare a plan for Y. And then 90 days, deliver your first version of boom, whatever that product might be, or a presentation. That's ideally what you want to be able to do to build those performance metrics out. Here's the thing. Put these in your job description, guys. It's nothing more critical than taking these performance metrics and putting them in your job description. If they're in your job description, then people know what the expectations are. Here's what you're going to be held accountable for the first 30 days. Here's what you're going to be accountable for the first 31 through 60, 61 through 90. And if you're really brave, you can stretch that out to 6 months. And look, it can only do you good, because having those performance metrics in place are going to help gain people's attention. And A players are going to lean into that because they know exactly what's expected of them when they join. So the performance metrics, putting them in the job description, and then actually evaluating people or holding people accountable against your performance metrics as they hit their mark. So at the 30-day mark, again, when you have those deliverables, you're going to have the presentations. They're going to know exactly where somebody is when they get in the momentum of working. So if you broke this down into 2 separate components of what somebody needs to do, what would those steps be pre-hiring?
Yeah. So, first thing is make sure your strategy is very clear, and then understand, work backwards. Like if your goal is to hit X amount of revenues, and that funnel looks like, so much growth, so much reach out, so much user eyeballs, work backwards on those metrics, and to figure out what you need to get from the top down on the funnel, and then attach those each to, product, what the product needs to do, what the engineers need to deliver, what the sales, customer success, and then see where you're missing in those variables, and then add to them. So and I suggest having like big goals, right? So if you have big goals, and you work backwards on those goals, then you'll be able to, I think, staff appropriately. But I think a lot of people look forward. In other words, they hire with the idea that this will grow. If I hire and do this, it will then grow. And I look backwards and say, no, I want to hit this number in December of next year. So I'm going to hire for that number.
Got it.
It's a little different.
Well, shoot, Kurt, we're getting pretty close on time. What would be 2 or 3 key takeaways you can give the audience that can plug into their business today?
Yeah. First is, strategically. So know your strategy and know your plan of action before you hire, and then put that into metrics. Number 2, and then the third thing is make sure that the people can deliver against it. So make sure you see their deliverables and their abilities to execute against that number. And what you need. So those are the 3 main things I would suggest doing.
Kurt, thanks so much for your time investment today, and I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. Now, what would be the best way in which members of the audience can find you, find your book, all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I have a personal blog website called KD Alive, kdalive.com, and my book's on there, and blog posts and things like that. So you can see me there, and you can email me at kd@kdalive.com. And of course, my book is live on Amazon at Navigate to the Lighthouse. So any of those, you can find me.
All right. I want to thank this week's audience for tuning into this week's episode of Higher Power. It was a rough one, but we powered through it. Thanks to our team, Brian Colburn, Andrea Ballin, and Ayla Gerard. And if you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. After all, this show's for you, and we want to continue to bring you valuable content week after week that you can plug into your business today. Join the Higher Power Radio community at Hire, H-I-R-E, Power, P-O-W-E-R, radio, R-A-D-I-O.com, or you can drop me an email at rickettstridesearch.com. Tune in next Tuesday. Our guest is going to be Alan Jones. Alan is the founder and CEO of Bambee. I'm your host, Rick Gerard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon, or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to hiring success, Rick Gerard.